My name's Isidora Paleologus, please call me Izzy. The session today will be probably about 40-50 minutes of me talking, maybe up to an hour, and then very much answering queries, questions that might arise from the session. I can see students individually afterwards, but very much please use it as an interactive session. So if you've got queries and questions, please ask as I go through. Now, for many of you, I'm presuming that you're at the stage where you've submitted your research methodology online. Your supervisor will have probably reviewed it. I know some of you might be struggling to get ethics approval still. I know there are some concerns. Some of you might be struggling to get your primary research, and I'm going to give you some ideas of how to tackle those things, but also then also to think about how you can present your findings as well, okay? I'm just going to go through almost initially a tick list of things that you should have in your research methodology. So hopefully you will have submitted your research methodology and you will have a meeting with your supervisor to review that. But this was posted in September, October time, but it's a long time ago. In your research methodology, hopefully you have discussed whether you're covering qualitative or quantitative data, which is one of the queries or questions that we might have, and your rationale of why you've chosen qualitative or quantitative methods. We are expecting that to be supported with theory and references. So in your research methodology, do a double check. Have you supported the research methodology with theory? Have you talked about qualitative versus quantitative debate? Have you clearly given a rationale for the decisions that you've undertaken? Have you had any feedback from your supervisor on your research methodology? Okay, so this is mainly focused on qualitative research. So what kinds of primary research have you opted for? Now, back in September, October, when you were applying for ethics, I described it to you like your shopping Christmas list. So you might find that you've put 3 different methods of research that you want to undertake. It could be that you're getting to the stage where time is running out, you're struggling to maybe secure one of those elements of research. You need to potentially liaise with your supervisor. It needs to be a joint conversation on if you've applied for 3 types of research, is it appropriate that you only maybe carry out 2 types of research? And later on you need to kind of reflect on why you've taken that path. When it comes to your interviews, one of the biggest challenges students face is securing interviews. It is difficult, especially if you're working with organisations. Maybe if you've been out on placement, you have contacts within those organisations, but if you haven't, you might be struggling. Have a list of potentially 6 or 8, or whatever you've applied for ethics organisations. If you are struggling to secure face-to-face interviews, potentially consider telephone interviews. You've handed in your research methodology. Have you prepared your interview questions? Many organisations will ask for the interview questions in advance. Last year, a student that I had, she managed to secure interviews with several big brands. You met her, Amy, with Danone, Tesco, some really big organisations. She, I think, secured, if I remember correctly, 5 interviews. 4 out of those 5 organisations asked to see the interview questions prior to the interview. So if you've got your ethics approval, get your interview questions ready straight away. If you're putting in a phone call or sending an email, and they might say to you, oh, we've got some time next week for you to conduct the interview. Or by the way, please could you send me your interview questions? So have that information ready. If you're still waiting for ethics approval, now's still the time. If you're doing focus groups, interviews, questionnaires, start to get all your questions ready. Can I ask, can you have a raise of hands if you're still waiting for ethics approval? Okay. I did post a note, and I know Maria's posted a note on site saying if you're still waiting for ethics approval, email your supervisor, and if you're a marketing student, please email me as well. If you're on another programme, email Maria Banks, and we're trying to chase the ethics approvals through, okay? Interview structures. In your research methodology, if you're planning to do an interview, have you spoken about the style of interview that you're going to do? Have you spoken about the type of questions you're going to ask? Have you talked about the structure of your interview? Is it going to be a formal interview or more of an informal interview? Are you going to show visuals and diagrams or images and ask potentially the person that you're interviewing to comment? Those are types of things they often like to see in advance. Is there a model or a theory, something that's been in the press, that you want the person that you're interviewing to comment on? Are you going in for a very unstructured interview? My recommendation to you as students is to have a fairly structured or semi-structured interview prepared. It's very, very difficult to go into an interview with an unstructured interview. It means that you really have to think on your feet, and unless you're a very experienced interviewer, it's very difficult. Also, I would recommend that before you carry out your interviews, that you email across to your supervisor your interview questions. Ask for their feedback. They might give you views and opinions. So often for my students, the interviews are semi-structured to structured, and students have asked questions to answer maybe a particular objective, but I've said to them, well, can you bring out something from your literature review? Is there something in the press that you want to include? Because your interview, you want to keep the conversation going between yourself and the person that you're interviewing. If you have 6 or 7 open-ended questions, you might have an interview with one person and it might last 20 minutes and that will be sufficient. You might interview somebody who's very quick, who gives quite short, abrupt answers, and it means that your interview is only going to last 5 or 10 minutes. If you have visuals, if you have data or other elements that will allow the conversation to continue, it means that you get more out of the interview. Also, on your interview, I often suggest to my students that you have a series of prompts. So if the person that you're interviewing is giving you fairly brief answers or hasn't really commented on what you were hoping that they'd discuss, have a series of prompts there ready for you to help to get more information from the interview. Okay. The ideal scenario, whether it's interviews, focus groups, questionnaires, whatever type of research that you do or forums, from writing up your results, it's ideal to try and have as many as possible. I know you need to be realistic. Carrying out one interview gives you nothing to compare. So a couple of interviews is ideal because a series of patterns will emerge and you'll be able to carry out comparisons between the different interviews, and it will allow your results section of your dissertation to be really strong. Interview techniques, securing interviews. What I say is be flexible. You might have a clear idea that there might be 6 brands that you want to carry out interviews with. You might not be able to get in contact with several of them. They might be out of the country. So try and be flexible when you're carrying out any of your research. Have you got ethics approval? You've just suggested particular organisations, so you could look at some other organisations. If you can't do the face-to-face interviews, can you opt for Skype or telephone interviews? Sometimes your ideal scenario doesn't happen within your primary research for your dissertation. So have a backup plan and be flexible. And when it comes to writing up your reflections for your dissertation, you can be quite honest and say, I really struggled to secure this interview. I had a student 2 years ago who was looking at crisis management in regards to politics, and he was trying to secure interviews with local MPs. He was a very hard-working, conscientious student. He did leave his primary research a little late, and he did really struggle to get their time because they were very busy individuals. And he ended up carrying out some of the interviews via telephone. He got a first in his dissertation. Some he managed to do face-to-face, but some he did on the telephone. But it allowed him to have interviews with several MPs and to draw some really interesting comparisons. So try and always consider how flexible you can be to try and get as much data as you possibly can. Be well organised for your interviews. It's your one chance. So really ensure that you've taken the time to check your interview questions, any materials that you're going to bring along, and try and ensure you speak to your supervisor either via email or face-to-face prior to your interviews to get their views and opinions to ensure that you've got all the data. Any questions so far? Yes?
When you do a face-to-face interview, why are you able to record it? Let's say if we do it on telephone, how would we, like, do we have to make notes quickly?
There's still recording devices that are available. So you could, if you did, maybe if you have to speak to the technical department and see what's possible, and you can maybe Skype and record it. I don't know. There is a technical team. Richard Ballawinda in the case will be able to give you some advice on what technical options. It could be that there's somewhere in the university where there's recording devices able to help you with that. The transcribing, I know, is a concern for many students. We do like to see the transcripts as appendices within your dissertation. It's very, very difficult to carry out the interview or to carry out a focus group and to do all the transcribing at the same time. So I agree with you, recording is the ideal. If you are struggling with the technology aspect, speak to Kay, speak to Richard, and he will be aware of all the resources that are available to help you. Any other questions so far? Okay. Think about the time that you're going to allocate to your research method and try and be realistic. You might like an interview for an hour, but it might be harder to secure those interviews. The chances are that the person that you're going to interview is going to ask how much of my time are you going to need. So make the most use of the time. Make sure the questions are correct. Make sure that you try, if it's a face-to-face interview, straight after the interview, maybe comment in your notes on things like body language and behaviour. I use my hands a lot, so I'm not one to copy on this, but just think about their attitude, their views, more than what they say, but how their body behaviour is as well. And have, a series of prompts, be well prepared, and it could be that they say to you afterwards, oh, would you like additional information? Or I might put you in contact with somebody else. You could also interview them. Over the years, I've had several students who carried out interviews with individuals, and then they said, oh, would you like to interview another colleague at another organisation? I think they might help. So they might give you a series of contacts. And remember that the people that you're interviewing might lead to help you with your chosen career path as well. So try and be as professional as you can, because it could create that right first impression. So Amy, who you saw in June when she came in to talk about her dissertation, she interviewed Danone as part of her dissertation. They're so impressed with her style of interviewing, how she carried out the interviews. She's now on a graduate programme there at Danone. So it can be a really, really important part of your career as well as your dissertation. Okay, group interviews, focus groups. Now, focus groups, they state in all the literature, shouldn't be more than an hour and a half long. I would say for you as students, that's an awful long time. I would aim for between half an hour and 40 minutes, being totally realistic. If you're carrying out a focus group, we suggest that you have the chairs in a half moon shape. Often for students, carrying out focus groups is quite daunting because it's not face-to-face. You're with a group of individuals. Ideally, in a focus group, you shouldn't have more than 10 people. You might be struggling to actually get people to participate within your focus groups. It might not be the ideal number that you want, or it might be not quite the right demographic that you want, or you might want to carry out 5 focus groups and you manage to get 4. Try and be as realistic as you can, but make a start on your focus groups. Think about the style of room that you choose, if it's going to be comfortable. Again, you need to be very well prepared for your focus group. I often suggest to my students that they almost carry out the focus group in a series of presentation slides, so that they have a script for themselves with a series of prompts. So it could be that you might want to show visuals, diagrams, keep it fairly open-ended for the views and opinions, being qualitative research. If you state a particular time that you're going to start, make sure that you start on time, make sure that you finish on time. You do need to ask the respondents involved to sign that they're happy to be willing to partake in the research and that their views and opinions are willing to be shared. Check with them if they want to be anonymous. And liaise with your supervisor again to ask them to have a look through all your focus group questions. You might find again, you might run 3 different focus groups. So focus groups was the style of research that I carried out a lot over the years because my background's advertising, so I've run hundreds over the years. I've had the same style of questions, same format for 2 different focus groups, and one focus group lasted 20 minutes and the other one would last an hour. And it could be sometimes that a certain group might not work as well together, or they might not give you as much information. So again, be prepared with a series of prompts, have visuals, make them comfortable, try and have a couple of questions to start that are more informal to break the ice, and again, ask everybody involved if they're happy to be recorded. Okay, we've covered telephone interviews as well. Another style of research is observation. Is anybody using observation within their dissertations? No? Okay. So observation could be that you're looking at somebody in practice and observing it. So I won't go into lots of detail, but if you're carrying out observation, you need to write detailed notes and record the information as soon as it happens so that you keep detailed records. Okay. Avoiding bias. Then you will have featured in your research methodology some of the limitations of carrying out primary research. The challenge is, how do you ensure that your research isn't biased? There is an element of difficulty because often some of the contacts that you're using for your dissertation are contacts that you know. Maybe people participating in interviews might be people that you dealt with while you were on placement, or it could be that people within the focus group are friends and family. But wherever possible, try and avoid bias. When you're carrying out the questioning, whether it's in an interview or a focus group, think about the style of questions and how they're worded. Think about how you phrase them. Try and carry out a neutral tone. Try and avoid lots of jargon. Ask short and direct questions. Try and set the scene. Ensure that you listen. You want to make a note of what people are saying, but also if it's face-to-face, their body language and their behaviour. And sometimes, if people within a focus group maybe are continuing to discuss further, you might want to summarise the points and say, is that what you're saying? Is that what you've agreed upon? And all of the information hopefully will be recorded, and so then you can look back on it later on. Be aware of cultural differences as well. If you've got an international dissertation, that might be something that you want to consider. Whether it's a focus group or an interview, we often suggest that if it's recorded, you can have it on CD or on a memory stick, the recording. You might be asked, so keep it. Don't discard of it until after you've submitted your dissertation. You do need to transcribe all your focus groups and all your interviews, and it does take time. We are expecting those to be in the appendices of your dissertation. If you have got ethics approval, my suggestion to you is to try as quickly as possible to get your primary research done. If you have got ethics approval and you think, well, I've got other things going on, I'll do my interviews in 2 weeks' time, try and get the dates in the diary, because the people that you're interviewing might be very busy. The same with your focus groups. So start to try and secure your interviews and focus groups as soon as you can. Okay. A couple. New media. How many of you using forums? A couple. Okay. If you're using forums, ensure that you have a question that is fairly clear, to the point, that's interesting. And if you struggle, consider using other forums, and consider after a week, if you haven't had any response, potentially adapting the question as well. Okay? So, a couple of messages before I show you how some past students have done it. Start your primary research as soon as you can, as soon as you have ethics approval. You've got about 10 weeks until hand-in, okay, of your dissertation, so it is looming. What can you do if you're struggling to secure interviews or focus groups? How many of you are struggling to secure either a focus group or an interview? Only one so far, okay. So think about potentially other ways of carrying out the interviews, liaise with your supervisor, try a slightly different format. If you're not at that stage as yet, think about it and have that backup plan. How can you present your qualitative research? How many of you have looked at past dissertations and how qualitative research has been presented? A couple of you, okay. So you've got to think about your research findings. You've taken all this time to carry out your primary research. You want to make sure that you present the information in a really clear way, but also a visually strong way. And any visuals or diagrams that you include in your results sections, you have to comment on. But if you were purchasing a textbook, and there was a textbook with just lots of copying, or there was a textbook with diagrams, charts, visuals, helping to summarise the data, you'd probably purchase that textbook. So you think of your markers, think of how you're presenting the work, and I've got 4 dissertations with me who all got A grades, varying from I think 73 to 90. I'm going to show you, how they've presented some of their research findings, and you can share your views. And all 4 students carried out qualitative research, and one of them opted for a case study approach as well. So, okay. So before I go on to that, ensure that you answer your research questions. Okay, make sure in your primary research that you actually answer your objectives. Be clear, be concise, make your visuals appealing. And the other thing, I've come from an advertising background, so I would say this, but be a little bit creative. Over the years, in the past, we saw so many pie charts in a dissertation. Think outside the box, be original. To get that first, if you're aspiring for that first, you want clear points, you want to be concise, but you want strong diagrams and visuals that display all the hard work that you've gone through to get your primary research. So, bear with me, I'm going to get the first dissertation up. Hopefully you can see that fairly well. So this student got 85%, so I'm going to talk you through how she presented her results chapter. So at the beginning of her results chapter, she had 3 objectives. She talked about the objective that she was going to address in her primary research. And in her primary research, she had a series of research questions to answer that overall objective. And she's broken those out here. And those research questions, and I think it was 3. She had 3 research questions to answer that objective. She's used that as the structure for her results chapter. Okay. So this student, she's now in John Lewis head office in their marketing department. She did 3 elements of research, all qualitative in nature. She did forums, she did focus groups, and she did interviews. Okay. So initially with her forums, she did struggle to get people to comment, and then after a while, all the information came flooding through. Because it was qualitative in nature, think about your tables, think about your headings. Okay. So just because it's your results chapter, make sure each visual that you include has a title. Don't include a visual without talking about what that particular visual means. So she's titled this Figure 4.1, Key Findings of Online Discussion Forums. And, she's used colour, she's got key comments that have come from that forum. Also, within your literature review, you've spent an awful lot of time researching your topic. Within her online forums, her interviews and her focus group, she discussed some of the theory within those questions, and she's commented on what the respondents have had, their views to what the academics were saying, and she's included a visual here. Okay. This was her, I'll show you a series of how different students have presented. So these were her focus groups findings. Again, she's got the key themes here, okay? She's again brought in her theory again and how that's worked in practice through her primary research. She's also presented some of the data in a table as well, some of her findings. So this was to do with attitude, and she's kind of got 3 key themes and what's happened within the research. Again, she's brought in the theory again. Okay, she's got some more key findings of her focus groups, and she's basically saying in this research that it's led to a series of subsequent points, and she's done a series of bubbles, she's called it, and used arrows to show where the views lead to, and she's used colour themes, she's got colour coding, and she said here that purple represents the similarities between both demographics, while dark blue are less likely to donate and light blue are most likely to donate. So as well as visually, she's using colour to show different views and opinions. Again, she's got another type of visual here. She's got almost a bubble diagram. She's got another theory that she's brought in. And towards the end of her results chapter, which is something that I do recommend that you do, she's got an overall summary visual and a summary section saying she carried out focus groups, interviews and forums. So after all 3 elements of research, these are the overall findings. She's written a summary of about 3/4 of a page saying the findings of her primary research, but she's also presented it beautifully visually too. Okay, shall I go through another one, so how another student's tackled it? Any questions? You're all very quiet. Okay. Okay, this student got the elusive 90. I've been here 8 years, I've never seen another 90s yet, but I'm hoping. Okay, so, again, she's highlighted which of her objectives she's addressing in her primary research. She carried out focus groups and interviews. She had 5 research questions, okay, which again have formed the structure to her results chapter. It's not the only way to do it, but this is just one style. It's often a fairly simple style and logical style for students. Okay. She's again brought in a bit of theory. So what she's done here, hopefully, I'll see if I can enlarge it. I very rarely use the overhead projector, so bear with me. Okay. So these were focus group findings, and she's done a series of focus group findings for each focus group. And what she's done, which I think is rather nice, is that she's put the core findings, the secondary findings, and the tertiary findings. So she's saying the core findings are the really key things that she's found out from this focus group. This dissertation was on branding and the use of logos, and these were the core findings. She carried out 2 interviews as part of her dissertation, and she's visually presented the views of the 2 people that she spoke to, and she's again colour-coded those. So it's really easy to see the different views. So use colour, use visuals, use tables, use diagrams, try and be creative. Make sure each visual or diagram has a title. For those of you who've hopefully completed chapters 1 to 3 of your dissertation, you might be putting your contents pages together. You should have your contents pages, and you should have a list of figures in your contents and a list of appendices. So start thinking about your list of figures and your list of appendices. Things like your interview questions, your focus group questions, your transcripts, all need to be there as appendices, but every single table or visual that you include within your dissertation needs to be within the list of figures. That's something you can start working on now, little by little, so that it's not such a daunting task at the end. Okay, so again, this was focus group 2, and she's carried out the same approach. She's got the core findings, the secondary findings, and the tertiary findings, and within the writing that supports these visuals, she carries out a comparison. As I mentioned to you earlier, the ideal scenario is to have more than one interview, or more than one forum, or more than one focus group, so that you can carry out comparisons between the similarities and the differences between the various forms of research that you've done. And again, she's presented that. This was the style that she opted for. Focus group 3. Again, more findings from the interviews. I won't go into focus group 4. Bear with me. And again here, she's shown the summary at the end, showing the summary of her research findings. Okay, and she's spent about 3/4 of a page to a page. The summary section of your results is a really critical section, so spend the time on it, but maybe support it with some form of visual, especially if you're opting for more than one research method, showing if you're doing focus groups and interviews. And it could be what academics versus consumers are thinking, or it could be what industry professionals versus consumers think, and show the comparison and the similarities in this final visual, bringing it all together. It's a really important end visual. Do you want me to show you one more? You're nodding. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
So she did 4 focus groups, so she did 4 separate, I think. So for example, I'm doing in-depth interviews between about 10 people. Does that mean I should do 10?
10's quite a lot, so you know, you need to liaise with your supervisor. It could be that you have a series of, you could tackle it in 2 ways. So you could have a visual for each of the 10, but because you've got 10 interviews, you could have a series of 4 or 5 themes. So have you got 4 or 5 research questions? So you could have a visual showing for each, say you have 3 or 4 key research themes, you could show what the 10 different respondents that you've interviewed,
One visual.
yeah, in one visual. So that would be another way to tackle it. Okay. Sorry, I'm just... Okay, this student got in the 80s. I've tried to pick students who've done particularly well to show you the best of the best, okay? So again, she's talked about the objective that she's... they're all ladies for some reason, so I apologise, but... yeah, so she's talked about the objective that she's addressing, and then she's got a series of research questions, which she's got here in the pink. Okay. So she's carried it out on, as we've just highlighted, she's taken a different approach. She's done it via questions, okay, or particular themes. And she's shown here visually the answers to those. Okay, and she's taken a slightly different style, but it's beautifully presented. So here, she's presented on question 2, the key findings here. So rather than by focus group or interview by focus group 1, focus group 2, as we've just discussed, this student's done it by question, okay? Because she had quite a large sample that she interviewed. And what she's done here, if you can see in the far corner, there's experts and consumers, and it's blue and pink, and she's highlighted whether it's the experts or the consumer's view to the question. So she carried out interviews and focus groups, if I remember correctly, several years ago, and what she did was she asked them pretty much the same questions, and she wanted to do a direct comparison, and she's colour themed it. Here, again, it's question 3. Again, you know, she did online discussion as well, and she did a comparison between the focus groups and the online discussion here to a particular question, because she had the same questions. question form. Again, she's colour-coded it. And she's taken a slightly different approach for the summary of her findings. Again, she's written about a page highlighting the overall findings from her primary research, and she's put the summary here in this context. So some of these students have carried out a series of different qualitative research methods. The students here vary between 2 or 3 different methods that they've chosen. And so if you're looking at more than one research method, ideally you want to do a comparison. So if you're doing focus groups and forums, what's been the views in the focus groups versus the forums? Has there been similarities or have there been any differences? I've got one more dissertation. Do you want me to show you one more, or is that enough? One more? Okay. This got in the early 70s. What she's done particularly well here, which I just want to show you, is she's done a nice table right at the beginning of her results chapter, showing the various different research questions, themes, and she said which questions have been addressed in which research method, and she's put the link to the study, which is a really nice way of starting to really help the reader have the clarity on which questions, which areas were going to be addressed in which form of research method. Yes?
So these questions, they're the themes in her study, not the actual questions that she
They're not her objectives. She's basically, these students have basically carried out 3 objectives, and through the literature review, they've answered some of the objectives, but they've either had 1 or 2 objectives that they haven't managed to address in the secondary research, so they've decided to address them in the primary research, and based on those objectives, they've come up with 4 or 5 questions or 4 or 5 themes that they want to answer in the primary research. And that basically forms, for these students, their structure of their results. And it's not all students choose to opt to do it in that way, but for many students it gives a very simple framework of presenting the results findings. Yeah.
Could we do it, background just on it, industry with consumers? Could we do it, compare it to what academics have said and what we found in interviews?
Yes?
So could we compare secondary data to primary data?
You could compare what you found out in your literature review and secondary data, and if you saw some of the other students had academic models which they brought in, and they were doing almost comparisons between what's been found out in the literature and what's actually happening in industry. So you could absolutely do that. You know, you can use different visuals and colour coding to really show that to the reader to make it nice and clear. Yes?
I'm doing a questionnaire and an interview,
Mhm.
both quant and qualitative data. So in terms of what the last dissertation you saw in terms of the colour coding, do you think that would be appropriate if I colour coded these what the interviewee said, these what the people from the questionnaire?
Absolutely, and then you could have, you know, often your sample, or who, you know, it might be academics versus practitioners, or consumers versus academics. You know, you can have the same colour theme all the way through to show it, and then have maybe a visual or a table towards the end showing any similarities or any differences. So when it comes to your summary, it's there just to help support your summary of your findings. Any other questions? Okay. So she's kind of followed the same structure because she particularly liked it, of the core findings, secondary findings. Let me just click through. She was looking at particular in social media and how social media is being used to look at voters. And then she's got key messages, and she's presented lots of series of the key themes and the flow of those themes and how that works in this visual. And that was from her interviews. She's followed it through again there. And she's also used a table. So don't just think you can use visuals, you can use tables as well to summarise key points as well, which she's done. And she hasn't used an overall summary diagram here. She's just put it in words, but you can use a summary how the other students have if you so wish to. Is this what you were expecting? Have you got any other queries or questions? Or you're quite quiet. Any other views or opinions? Anything you're struggling with? Do you think this is something now that you could tackle and you could do? I do have drop-in sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 12 to 1. If you want to come and see me, you can happily see some of these dissertations that I've shown you today in more detail. Also, CASE do have copies of dissertations, so these tend to be marketing, because this is my area, but CASE have dissertations across all subject areas that have either got a high 2-1 or a first. But just a couple of pointers for you, really, where students sometimes struggle, is think about what you actually want to say, the key points that you want to make in your results chapter. You have to be fairly concise. Use visuals and diagrams and tables to support your points. Make sure they're always clearly labelled. Use colour, use themes, whatever you want to ensure that your points are really clear to your supervisor, but also remember, your dissertation isn't just marked by your supervisor who might know your research in depth. It's also second marked as well. So you want to make it easy as possible for your reader to navigate through your dissertation. So using diagrams, visuals, colour, tables, clear points, clear themes, just helps to ensure that all your hard work is shown in its best possible light. Any other questions? Has anybody actually started their results chapter yet? Okay, one person has, okay. Okay, so feel free to come and see me with any questions or queries that you may have. If you are starting on your primary research, make sure that you're really well prepared and that you liaise with your supervisor before starting that primary research. Okay, thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you found it helpful.